Hello, you wonderful people, and welcome to another episode of Crime Centric. This being a show where we talk about TV shows that are crime dramas. For today's episode, I'm going to talk about the series premiere of Parish, a great series premiere. A lot of really interesting things went down in this episode, so let's break it down. Well, first and foremost, I think it's so interesting, obviously, the immediate res opening we got in Rewound 7 days. I went into this series having a misunderstanding. I thought that basically what Parish ends up getting mixed up in this episode ends up leading to his son's death, but it turns out his son had died some time ago because Parish is with his family. Gracian is with his family, and they kind of talk about this being their first Maddox's first birthday since he died. So it hasn't been that long. It's probably been months at best, because he does say, like, right, for him it feels so fresh, it almost like it happened yesterday. So it hasn't even been a full year. You'd assume, especially with that point of like, oh, it's been like, his first birthday without him. So, but that was a misunderstanding I had going into this. So it does recontextualize everything. So it changes things, because I felt like, oh, he was on a revenge trip going after the people who killed his son, which still could be the case. I don't know if the people he ends up working with ultimately end up being responsible for that, or they lead to him finding the people. Like, we don't even know how his son died. Like, they kind of kept that extremely vague, but it seemed like it was horrific enough that obviously it stuck with them. But obviously, Gracian, played by Giancarlo Esposito, obviously it's just like, man, every time you turn around you see Giancarlo, which is never a bad thing. But like, because the most recent thing I saw him in was The Gentleman. But it's interesting seeing the character he plays in this, because more often than not, Giancarlo Esposito is playing that character of, hey, I'm the one that's in control of most of the situation. It's like, no, he's just the driver in this situation. He's very good at what he does. There's that show he did on Netflix. I meant to watch it, but I've never circled around to it. It's called Kaleidoscope. In that, he's kind of like a brainiac mastermind. But most often than not, you see him play the villain role. In this one, he's playing like, hey, I'm a good guy who's done some bad things. He's not a Gus Fring, which, Gus, still wasn't always Gus. It took circumstances and situation to turn him into the fearful Gus Fring. It's actually interesting, because when I do think of Gus, I don't always think about his past. I always think about the Gus we got introduced to, the Gus we got to know more often of. So it's and obviously, like, a lot of people probably have Giancarlo Esposito in their head specifically as Gus Fring, because when most people see him, they're like, hey, Gus Fring. But either way, so that's what makes his character so interesting. Having not seen Kaleidoscope, but like the little bit I've seen of Kaleidoscope in like commercials and stuff, it kind of shows like, right, like that's not him playing like a bad guy. It's like, hey, I'm a guy who does some bad things. Sure, it seems like he's kind of in a similar boat here. Once again, he's just a driver, but he is, as he's got a good head on his shoulders. He can figure stuff out. He seems like he toes the line between, hey, I got this stuff figured out because I've had years of experience with it, but I'm also just a very skilled driver. But I'm a driver with brains, and kind of can quickly, like, freestyle when a job kind of potentially goes sideways and variables kind of kick in, and you just have to kind of account for stuff. So, but either way, I'm getting way, way, way ahead of myself. He is just trying to live a regular life. We haven't really clarified how long he's been out of the game, what drew him out of the game. Was it having children? Was it getting married? Like, does Rose know about his past? Which, funny enough, kind of in that crime drama vein, that they obviously, the actress is Paula Malcolmson. The thing I best know her for is playing Abby in Ray Donovan, so it's kind of an interesting parallel in some capacities. Obviously, I think this relationship's a little bit better than Abby and Ray's relationship with all its complications. It's also a funny thing. If you'll excuse me for a moment, I'll do the weird thing that I do where I'm like, oh, it's funny connecting dots across, like, actors and stuff. Both Giancarlo Esposito and Paula Malcolmson have connections to the DC universe. At least one I'm aware of. Maybe they have others, but Paula Malcolmson played Superman's great-grandmother in the show Krypton, and Giancarlo Esposito voices Lex Luthor in the Harley Quinn animated series. So it's just a little funny tidbit, just kind of, just funny stuff like that. Either way, tangents and all that aside. Once again, it's just that typical thing of, I've been out of the game for a minute, but I get drawn back in for two reasons. One, I'm already struggling. He's got this very luxury car like service, but obviously, like, ride sharing is taking a bite out of his business opportunity. He brought in a partner, which that's kind of going sideways. He can't even get it alone. But his buddy Colin, played by Skeet Ulrich, Skeet Ulrich. I don't know why I was butchering that so much. But his old buddy comes around because, yeah, he kind of screwed up a job, and I think the person he was on the job with ended up getting killed. And now, because he's working for a guy known as the Horse, and he owes him a lot of money, and owes him a favor, and he needs to kind of do him this favor, and he needs Gracien's help, but Gracien doesn't want to take those steps back. It's like, right, I think, once again, we don't know when he left the game. I mean, he was talking to someone from the past who he was talking to. Apparently, she like works at a church, or she's tied to a church, and she's like, yeah, I don't look back at that old life anymore. She's like, in fact, you ended up helping me pull me out of that life. And he's like, I kind of didn't really do much. So there's a lot there. I don't know if they were like colleagues in the same field in the criminal world, or whether she was in a different lane of the criminal world and he pulled her out, whatever the case may be. You'd assume they probably worked very closely with each other in some capacity to still be in touch all these years later, or sometime later. So, like I said, I don't know if it's just like maybe Maddox being born made him want to step out of the game. So, and both his children, Maddox include would have, is in his teenage age when he died, but also his other child, Michaela, is a teenager as well. So my point being, like, if he's been out of the game that long, so that feels like the biggest motivation to get you out of like whatever criminal game you're mixed up in. But obviously, you also had that voiceover at the beginning of the episode, what ends up being, I think, a fundamental element to the show will be like, oh, he's so tired of being in the passenger seat of his own life, because he's had to basically, despite being the driver, he's always been in the passenger seat of like, I'm always riding someone else's coattail, I'm always a part of someone else's operation. This is me kind of taking my own life, my own destiny into my hands. Like, very important word there, being destiny. But his family situation is complicated because Rose wants to leave because it's like, we can't stay here. It's too expensive. I'm not making enough. You're not making enough. Like, we can't afford all of these elements of our lifestyle here. It's just too much. And obviously, he doesn't want to leave because it's also like, right, we raised our family here. This is our home. We shouldn't have to move out of our home. But it's also like, I'm sure elements of this is also Maddox's home, and him not being here is like, if we move away, we lose a piece of what still connects us to Maddox. Because we do see him at some points like boxing in the garage, and near the later part of the episode, we see Rose like holding them and kind of sniffing them and then putting them in a box and kind of breaking down. I can only assume those were Maddox's, and maybe that's also another way that that Gracien like keeps his ties to Maddox. Obviously, Rose and Michaela were having a nice situation without before Gracien showed up, and he kind of made it awkward bringing like Maddox's photo and putting it on the table, because it seems like he's never kind of been there when they've had those moments to kind of like, hey, let's remember Maddox. Like, it seems like he's always either been late because he's so busy drowning in his own sorrow. He's not there, because it's not like, hey, you're not the only one that lost a son. Your wife lost a son, your daughter lost a brother, and in a lot of ways, Rose lost a husband, and so Michaela lost a father too, because you're drowning so much in your own sorrow, trying to keep yourself above water. But it's also like, you're doing all this to distract yourself. There's even that line from Michaela, which was kind of very heartbreaking, where it's like, yeah, you and Maddox were so close. Like, you built up an entire car together just to give it to him, and you won't even take me for driving lessons. Like, that's all I ever wanted. Just kind of showing like, right, I get it. Your favorite kid died. And even if he never said that, his actions make her feel that way. It's like, I'm sad that Maddox is gone. I miss him too, but I'm still alive, Dad. But it feels like, it's when Matt, and that's kind of like, I'm sure that makes her feel a certain way, because it's like, here I am jealous of a dead sibling. It's like, even when he was alive, like, all you ever did was give him your attention, and even now that he's dead, all you're doing is giving him your attention. Like, I'm sure that stirs a whole bunch of complicated feelings in her too. I did think it was super nice of him to kind of try and make things up for her and take her driving and stuff. And despite it only lasting a little bit, it doesn't make up for the years he probably wasn't really as like paying as much attention to her as he should. It was kind of a nice step in the right direction, but it doesn't like completely rid her of that void she kind of feels when it comes to them. It's like, once again, it's like you and Maddox had your thing. I mean, I guess that also kind of implies like maybe Michaela and Rose had the better relationship, you know, because they're the ones that were sitting down and have a fine dinner and everything until Gracie showed up and kind of ruined it and made it awkward and just very sad, you know. Especially when it's like, right, you're putting his photo at the dinner table and it just is sitting across from your daughter. It's like, I already have to live with knowing he's gone, and now what are we supposed to do? Pretend like he's there? It's like, once again, it's going to stir up a lot of complicated feelings in Michaela, justifiably so. Like I said, in my head, I always think of Giancarlo Esposito as like this character who's, like I said, a mastermind who's always so in control. And he presents some of that in this character, but this character isn't like a, oh my god, like I'm so in control. I've got this smugness of like, oh yeah, like everything's going to go according to plan. It's like, no, I'm taking this one step at a time. I'm like, I want to do everything I can to lessen the chances of things going sideways. I'm not foolish enough to believe life is completely in my control, considering how much life has spiraled outside of his control, understandably, with everything that he's been through, losing Maddox and everything. So it is that interesting juxtaposition with like other characters Giancarlo's played before. So, and once again, it is always going to sadly be that compare and contrast with like anything, especially because, like I said, a lot of times, not all the time, but quite often he will get typecast as a villain. This is him playing a very neutral character, I think. Once again, I guess if anything, you could make the argument makes him a little more Walter Whitish in a lot of comparisons. But obviously, like Gus had his situation as well. But once again, you always associate with him who he ultimately ended up becoming, the Gus Fring we all know, not the Gus Fring or the Gustavo that he once was. Even the horse ended up not being the guy that you thought he was. In fact, Zenzo ends up being more of who you think the horse would be. But because like Zenzo's kind of got this like very like, I am wild and he feels like he's the unpredictable sibling. Like you definitely have to watch your back around him because he, as we see later on, is willing to kind of get wild. But it seems like the horse kind of has this quiet rage about him where it's just like he's a scary type because he's very much a Gus Fring where it's like he's got this quietness to him, and that quietness is scarier than the guy who is like able to fly off the handle. Once again, unpredictability when it comes to a criminal is probably scarier. The person that can be vicious, but like, you know, the person who's vicious, in this case Zenzo, answers to the horse. So what does that say about the horse? It's also kind of interesting knowing that this is a whole family operation because at the top of it is their dad, but the trio of siblings, Zenzo, his sister, and the horse work on this. In fact, their dad even threatened the horse, being like, yo, should I be giving this to your brother to handle? Because the job that like Colin shit the bed on kind of screwed them out of money. Apparently, this isn't the first time they've been late. It also seems like they've got some competition, like someone else probably smelling blood in the water, trying to take an opportunity to... Because that's what his sister's like, right, dad's on your like ass like this just because there's like new competition in the area. Or maybe it wasn't competition, maybe it was more like business partners they have are here and you screwing things up is going to look bad on dad in the operation in the business. So yeah, he's a little harder on you because business partners there. Maybe it's not the competition that I'm kind of thinking it might be. Of like, what I mean is like not other like another rival gang or group. Like I don't think that's what that was about. I think it might be a business partner thing. I can't remember the exact wording his sister used when she was like, hey, dad's just on you because kind of the stress of things. So I forgot to talk about it, but there is like going back to Colin really quickly, his relationship with Gracian. It's like, right, he's like, dude, I held it down for you, I never snitched. And it's like, yeah, but I put money in your commissary, I held your piece for you, and I got it all for you when you ended up releasing. So it's like, I think we're square. But it's like, nah, dude, I held it down for you, I was there for you, I'm just asking you to do the same for me. And because now he's torn between, hey, you are like family to me, you are basically my brother, versus, you know, his actual family, which even he made a point like, whoa, I thought I was family, Gray. So that complicated things. Like, would he, if he wasn't in the financial situation he's in, would he have, pulled the trigger on this situation, figuratively speaking? Who knows? Because he was always going to get pulled back to this life in some shape or form. But is it, it's mainly like a monetary, like money thing. But part of me wonders, he does kind of miss it a little bit, but he only misses it because of the monetary element to it. Or is it a little deeper where like he thinks it's about the monetary element of it, but it's a little bit more of like that freedom behind the wheel. We even saw it when he was cutting loose with Colin when they were like in the car whipping it around in that I don't know if that was like a parking lot or whatever, but it's like whipping around like there was like a freedom to it that he hasn't really been able to cut loose like that in so long. I also, really quickly, I love the conversation between Parish, Gracian, and the horse, especially that conversation about like trustfulness and how can I take your word, and it's like the whole conversation of like, oh yeah, people like lie to strangers like from like 10 to 200 times, what was it, like a day or something like that, or in a week or something like that, and it's like, and twice of it that might be like a lie to themselves or something like that. Like the whole conversation about lying and the lies we tell others, the lies we tell ourselves, and then like for that to come back up at the end of the episode the way it does, I thought was kind of like nice having that conversation come full circle. But either way, it was supposed to be kind of a simpler job. Colin was supposed to break into a place, get to the safe. They were going to go at night, but Gray suggested let's do it during the day, on a day where like there wouldn't be much security, not many people in the building. Plus, we got to get someone who be able to know the combination, and that's where this Peter guy comes into play. But the problem is the Peter guy didn't know the code, or at least claimed not to know the code. So he keeps putting it in, and it's not right. He calls up one of the partners and gets the actual code. Does seem interesting timing that the cops would show up at that time. I am curious, is it a situation of, do they have because he never said anything suspicious, so I'd almost wonder, I'm like, I doubt there's a thing on the safe that's like, oh, if you put in the wrong code, it automatically, a certain amount of times maybe it automatically calls the cops. I don't know. It might just be a situation where it's just like, no, he was talking to he's probably calling the police the whole time, and it never was the business partner, maybe, and he was just like, oh, let me get the code wrong a few times. Now I'm calling the cops, like, oh, now I can, oh, let me get it wrong one more time. Oh, now let me put it in correctly. I guess that was the rub of it all, because like the cops showed up too damn quickly for that to be any other case. So I do love the reveal too, where we're thinking like, oh, Parish was like in the car by himself in the opening, so you're like, oh, did something go sideways or something? It's like, no, they were in the back trunk the entire time when he was whipping it back and forth. It's interesting too, because we get this little element of his character too, like, because I noticed it in the opening, he was like, come on, let's go. He's talking to himself, but it's like, I guess that's how he kind of pushes himself. It's like, oh, he needs that reaffirming, he needs to reaffirm himself to be able to kind of like put himself there and push himself, because we saw he did that not only in the car, but he also did it while he was boxing. I mean, once again, I think that's a thing that tied him and Maddox together too. So, but it's just how he is able to kind of push forward with everything kind of weighing on him. It seemed like the job, despite the hiccups, went not without a hitch, but was successful. But there was a lot more noise. It was supposed to be a quiet job, and I was like, yeah, this feels like someone's gonna die type of situation, because I vaguely remembered from the trailer that scene at the end of the episode. But obviously, it's like where the camera was angled, you didn't, like, obviously with the context of the trailer, you never saw who it was. I was like, I don't think it's going to be Colin. I'm assuming Colin's going to be a recurring character, but you never know. He could easily get popped. But it wasn't him. It was the other guy. Didn't even get popped. He got beat by a crowbar, because at first I almost thought it was like a machete. Speaking of the gentleman, if you've seen, if you know, I thought that was kind of happening. It's like no, it was a crowbar. It's like, man, he went ham. And once again, like, shows you the difference between Zinzo and the horse. Like, Zinzo was like so ballistic with it, just kind of like enjoying it. And he looks at his brother, and the horse is looking at him like so disgusted, because it's like, you ruined my coat, my clothes, you ruined my, like, I got blood everywhere. And I think it's just like, it's like you could have handled that very differently. Like, you didn't have to go as wild as you did. Like, once again, that's why I think the horse is leading stuff and his brother isn't. Doesn't quite seem like an equal dynamic between the siblings, because even his sister called him out, like, oh, you're like, when she was talking to Zinzo earlier in the episode, it's like, oh, you're hiring someone without talking to me. He's like, oh, like, do I have to like tell to you about like profit stuff I handle that business side of things too, because he's the head of like Zenzo handles a lot of like the business side of things, whereas the horse handles everything from the top, but his brother kind of handles a lot of like I think a lot of the financial elements to their organization. Not quite sure what role their sister plays in it quite yet. The horse wanted to end up like because I love that scene too, where it's like the horse is going to pay Gracie, but Gracie was almost like, no, I don't want the money. But he's like, no one works for me for free. I think there's an element of, no, you've taken the money now. You have to take the money because that's the only way, like, we will have a connection. Because it's like, I don't want to be in a situation, first and foremost, where I owe you. I'm sure that's where Gray's coming at it. Because, like, if I take that money, I'll always be in your pocket. I will always be someone like, oh, you'll be able to purchase and be able to yada, yada, yada. Despite him saying this will be the one-time job deal. But it's also, like, I think the same could be said with the horse of, like, I don't want to be in your debt. Because it's, like, you're too good at what you do for me to let you go. I need you. It's like, right, we're no longer strangers. Kind of be like, we're friends now. And he's like, because I'll be a friend for life was the... what he had told Gray earlier in the episode. So, and because Gray had promised, like, oh, I'll dispose of the body because he was going to make Colin do it because he's like, what am I paying you for? And so, but Gray's like, no, I'll handle it. So, not just the one job because it's not just going to go away because especially with the whole Zenzo thing where he was like, hey, when I call, you pick up. I don't even care if you're taking a dump. Because when he was with Michaela driving, it took him 3 rings to hang up, answer, and Zenzo made a point of that too. So I feel like that's going to be probably a recurring theme. We'll see when shit's really popping off. Like Zenzo's probably going to call him, and it's like, oh, you didn't pick up, or you have 5 missed calls from me. That's an issue. And I could definitely see the story kind of taking a direction like that. But like I said, kind of a great start to kind of introduce us to these characters and the circumstances to some extent. Obviously, there's still major pieces to this puzzle that we're missing, but it's going to be interesting to see where the rest of the season takes us, where Gray has started off and how he gets to... Is that him going up against the horse? Like, why does he turn against him? Like I said, does he find out they have something to do with his son's murder? Because there is never any clarification on that. His son's death. I'd almost wonder, was it like a drunk driving thing? Because the way he was like, whoa, I don't want my daughter drinking. To be fair, she's underage, so there's that. But and that's why I almost want like him sticking Maddox's photo in front of her. I thought that was alcohol related, of like, oh, this is what happened to your brother. Like, let it be a life lesson thing. But no, it's just, hey, it's his birthday. I want him to kind of be at the table with us. So once again, there's still that mystery factor of exactly how did Maddox die. Even where his grave is set up, it looks like it's in the middle of like a park or something. So it feels like it probably is more like a maybe he got killed and left for dead type of situation. Like, because it's not even like a proper like cemetery. It's just like I think a basket where he puts the flowers, and like on cardboard he wrote like a happy birthday message. So we'll have to see. I'm very excited to see where the next episode takes us going forward with all of this. I should also note, before I wrap this up, I completely forgot to talk about it a little bit. I mean, it's a relevant conversation to still have. This is, as you can see in the opening credits, this is based off a British show called The Driver. It's a very short show. I think it's only like 3 episodes from a couple years ago, and so this is like an adaptation. But because I've never seen The Driver, I don't know like how close of an adaptation this is. It'll probably be pretty far apart. I haven't watched too many American versus like British shows. The only one that I'm very familiar with is the Being Human show. Like how those are similar shows in some capacities, but vastly different in a lot of other ways. So I'm sure this show's in the same vein, especially because this will probably end up being 8 episodes, I'd assume. Correction, I just looked it up, is apparently only going to be 6 episodes, but that kind of makes sense for AMC and stuff like that too, because they do have some 6-episode shows. But either way, kind of double the length of the British show, but once again, like, also depends on how long those episodes are, because those can range sometimes, and just pacing and stuff like that, and how much of the stories they explore. So probably when this is done, I'll probably eventually try and track down the original British show just to kind of compare and contrast. You see what they did different, what they did similarly. So either way, like I said, I'm excited to continue this. But really, that's all I want to talk about. So the next time we meet, be happy, be safe, live life to the fullest, and enjoy it. Good day and goodbye.